And now we are live. Hi, James. How are you doing this morning? I think that is evening or afternoon
It's
on your side.
afternoon for me.
Okay, so
Afternoon.
good afternoon, James. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. Excited to be here today.
Great. So, without further ado, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to our audience. And before I let you make or do your magic, I want to welcome everyone to this fifth annual Virtual Global Conference 2025. This one is a big one. Why? Because this is the fifth time that we are doing this event. So that being said, back to you, James. Have fun.
Thank you. Afternoon, everyone. From Wales. It's the afternoon here at the moment, wherever you're joining from. Thank you for joining me today. And I want to talk to you about something that sits beneath pretty much every framework, every dashboard, every PMO process. But in my opinion, it's one of the things that often gets overlooked, and that's psychological safety. And again, I think this is one of the PMO's greatest untapped assets that can be used to really shape delivery. But before we dive into the problem, just a little bit about myself. So I'm a PMO leader by day. I work in NHS Wales. I've got over 13 years experience in and around projects and national portfolios. The one thing I've really learned from that is that project management isn't really about Gantt charts or dashboards. It's actually about people and how we work with them. I'm the founder of Eva P3, a small idea that I started back in lockdown, which was a way to make project management feel a bit more real, relatable, and really focus on the human elements of it. That's grown into a bit of a community now that shares stories, lessons, and laughs about the stuff that you don't really read in the textbooks. My background is in project management, but I've got quite a diverse background before that, starting in the NHS and the ambulance side as a call taker. But I went on to do my master's degree in project management, and that's where I did my dissertation around psychological safety and really got interested in the subject. And basically, I just want to focus on creating a space where people feel safe to speak up. It makes delivery so much better and less painful when you do that. I've got an upcoming, I'm a contributing author on an upcoming book, and as an APM fellow and mentor, I really get to support some amazing project professionals who are just developing now and coming through the ranks, which is honestly one of the best things I do. So for me, I'm here because I care about making project management make sense again for everyone. So a quick look at where we're heading today. Basically going to break it down to three main areas: the problem, the cause, and the opportunity that the PMO has to be able to build upon this area. So starting with the problem, PMOs are overflowing with frameworks, dashboards, and governance models now more than ever. But despite all that structure, delivery still derails. And that's not because the tools are wrong, but because people don't usually feel safe to speak the truth, is what I've found. And that gap between what we show and what's really happening, that's at the heart of this talk. And there's no better way to illustrate that than the classic watermelon problem. So you've all seen this. Dashboards and reports look perfectly green on the outside until you cut them open and realize that they're actually red on the inside. But what actually is the cause of this? The watermelon problem, portfolios look fine right up until the moment where they collapse. Now, it's easy to think that this could be a reporting issue, that it could be fixed with better dashboards or tighter controls and clearer criteria. And in some cases, that might be true. But the truth in my experience has been that watermelons are actually more of an underlying symptom. And the real issue is whether people feel safe to actually tell the truth of what's going on. When that safety is missing, silence starts to creep in. Plans get tinted with things like optimism bias, where people generally believe things will go better than they probably will because hope feels safer than honesty. And reports get shaped by strategic misrepresentation, not lying, but self-protection, shaping the message to look good because showing the bad news feels career limiting. People start managing that message instead of managing their reality. And while it shows up first in reporting, it's not about the reports, it's about candor. It's about the freedom to say this isn't actually going well before it actually becomes a major crisis in the work that you're doing. I've seen this play out firsthand in some of the organizations I've worked with. Dashboards become comfort blankets where people sort of hide behind the green and just feel that, if they say it's green, it's safe. And they look structured enough to become credible. But underneath, the people around the table, the project teams actually know where those cracks are. And the truth is, nobody in the team actually wakes up to mislead. It happens because somewhere along the line in that project journey or that team journey, honesty started to feel unsafe. And it's understanding those causes that will help us fix this. A red status can feel like a career risk to some people, or feel like it's going to look badly on them. So people start polishing the message instead of tackling the actual reality. The irony, when everything looks green, leaders actually relax, and that's when projects actually start to derail. A culture that rewards honesty early will always outperform one that punishes it late. So if the frameworks and dashboards alone aren't enough, what's really going on in delivery today? So PMOs have delivered the control organizations wanted. They've brought in things like frameworks, dashboards, governance, assurance. But the paradox, in some places, those same controls can actually erode trust, not because the controls were wrong, but because that open and honesty wasn't designed into them. So we saw this during COVID and then around the lockdowns. Things like remote working became a lot more clear. It made more projects more inclusive. More voices were able to get in a room together from further apart. But what this also made was concealment to become a lot easier. We all saw the sort of dreaded muted Teams grids where people were hiding with cameras off in silence. Dashboards became the sort of reality, but they were also quite detached from what was actually going on. And now we're starting to see AI creeping in as well. So these tools generate flawless looking reports and updates in seconds. They can interpret and analyze data very quick. And there's been a couple of sessions today talking about the use of AI. However, if nobody feels safe to challenge the machine, the illusion of certainty replaces truth. AI is brilliant at speed, precision, pattern spotting, and so many other things, but it can lack context, it can lack nuance and that human gut instinct that we have. And the data might say a project is 82% on track, but people on the ground might know that the morale is starting to tank within the team. People are unhappy or nervous, or there's other human factors coming into it, things like AI can't interpret. And that's how the dependencies are actually starting to slip. The real risk is that AI isn't replacing people, it's actually replacing the conversation and replacing some of those human skills that came into it that we actually do need to keep. So if teams don't feel safe questioning what the algorithm is spitting out, we'll end up with dashboards that look smarter, but will in fact tell us a lot less. The next generation of PMOs won't actually compete with AI, they'll actually complement it. And this is where I think they'll bring in the human candor that machines can't simulate, curiosity, challenge, and the courage to actually say that something doesn't add up here. And that's where, in my opinion, the human element matters most. The gut instinct that says this doesn't look right, the courage to question those numbers that it's actually displaying, and that open and honesty to admit when reality doesn't match the actual slide deck that we're showing in one of those project boards. So the paradox isn't in the past, it's evolving. And without things like psychological safety, our future risks becoming theatre performed by humans and algorithms. But with any sort of theatre, it always leaves clues, and it shows up in delivery in some very specific ways that I'm going to take you through now. So I've put this down as like the hidden costs of silence. These are the symptoms of silence, and they might look familiar in some of the projects that you work with. on the surface, everything looks fine. You know, back to that watermelon, we have green reports, achievable plans, tidy risk registers. But just like an X-ray, if you look a little deeper, the fractures are obvious. We start to find out that there's greenwashing in reports. We find out there's optimism bias in plans. Strategic misrepresentation is going on. And some of those risks are being buried. Each one is a symptom of the same thing, people who don't really feel safe to tell the truth. These aren't one-off or bad luck. These are predictable costs of silence in delivery. So if silence produces these symptoms, what would it look like to build candor, that open and honesty into delivery from the start? And I think that is the untapped asset. So just gone through what the sort of the symptoms of silence and how they all look familiar. On the surface, everything looking fine, but how do we actually bring in that psychological safety? And more importantly, what is actually psychological safety? So Amy Edmondson, who's one of the sort of leading people behind psychological safety, she defines psychological safety as a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. Think of it like walking a tightrope with safety net. You can take risks, even misstep. You can even fail, and you will be caught by that safety net. So there's no risk of actually failing or for standing up and talking to what you need to do. In practice, that means people feel safe to ask questions, raise risks, admit mistakes, and challenge assumptions without any fear of punishment, embarrassment, career damage, or anything else that might be going through their heads. This isn't just an academic part, though. William Kahn first talked about bringing their whole selves to work without fear or negative consequences. And more recently, Google's project Aristotle actually found after studying more than 180 teams, psychological safety was the single biggest predictor of team performance. And that wasn't skills, workload, not leadership style. It was actually the safety to speak up. I first actually came across the concept of psychological safety at a patient safety conference a few years ago, where they showed us a video of a operating theatre. However, in this operating theatre, an operation that was taking place, there was no psychological safety, and the clinicians in and around the room were afraid to speak up and raise that they didn't think this was going to work, and this was missing, and this was not going to happen. And the outcome was tragic. The patient didn't actually survive. And that moment actually stayed with me, and it was the first time I really understood the cost of silence. And from my perspective, working in the PMO at the time, I actually started to think about the projects we deliver and silence and the cost of silence in those projects. So the context changes, but the consequence doesn't. That experience is what pushed me to study the topic formally in my master's research. And I focused on psychological safety in particular within project management and in PMOs in particular, where I was based. And the findings mirrored what I'd seen in healthcare, where teams felt safe to challenge, projects delivered faster, with fewer unplanned escalations, and there was far more honest reporting. Where safety was low, there was evidence of optimism bias, silence grew in equal measure, and the teams were generally unhappy. The takeaway from my research was that psychological safety isn't actually a soft concept. It's a hard delivery advantage. And the myth bust is that psychological safety isn't about comfort or consensus. It's about that open and honesty whilst under pressure, getting the truth out when it matters the most. So how do you know if your PMO has it or not? The symptoms can show up very clearly. In low safety environments, over towards the left-hand side of this chart, reports stay green until collapse. Meetings are things like quiet. Dissent moves online. Escalations are avoided because they feel like failure, and the PMO is seen more like the project police. In high safety environments, risks are surfaced early, messy truths are actually valued, and escalations are actually seen as responsible and blocking. The PMO becomes trusted as an enabler. These aren't just cultural differences, they're actually delivery differences. And in those high safety environments, they actually show stronger collaboration. Innovation is often a lot faster, sharper decisions, and the talent tends to be retained. We don't lose staff as much. Every PMO sits somewhere on the spectrum, and this is just a very brief list of some of the symptoms you might experience either way. But I've worked on PMOs and within projects that sit on both ends of the scale. In one, no one actually wanted to be the first to show a red highlight report, and it was quite clear that things were massaged on the highlight report to actually show green in those meetings, because you didn't want to be the one to stand up and say, oh, we've actually, we're falling behind here. The second didn't just deliver better because we actually had psychological safety. We actually had a different way of working. Red reports were celebrated in a way, not to actually say, well done, you're failing. It was more a case of, right, we know where we've gone wrong. How do we quickly fix and adapt and overcome these issues? And once that open and honesty became routine, surprise actually disappeared. So whether the report was red, amber, green, or somewhere in between, it actually became our way of working, and people actually felt comfortable to actually share lessons learned. It was the same tools, same sort of group of people, but we had very different outcomes. And because the difference really only comes into focus with this when we actually start to look at particular areas. So I'm going to take you through a couple of those areas now where you can actually start to see some of these examples. So risk management. If there's one area where I think psychological safety makes or breaks delivery, it's definitely around risk management. In low safety environments, risks are like cracks in the dam. People see them but don't feel safe raising them, so the cracks start to spread, the leaks worsen, and by the time leadership or your project board start to find out, the whole structure is under pressure. Whereas in those high safety environments, those cracks are spotted early. People raise them because they know they'll be heard. Repairs happen, so that mitigation comes in. So the structure is still sound, and people hold it and bring that delivery together so it holds. It's, again, the same dam, same project, but two different approaches, and the difference is whether people feel safe enough to surface those risks early, or if they're going to let them go and let that dam start to crack. And this sort of difference doesn't just come from process. I find that this starts to come from leadership. With innovation, innovation needs safety. Innovation doesn't just come from silence. In low safety environments, people keep ideas to themselves. They recycle what they've done before because they know that it works, and they just don't really want to be the one to sort of step outside of that box. The cost of being wrong feels higher than the benefit of being bold in these sort of environments. However, in a high safety environment, ideas flow. People challenge assumptions. They test unusual solutions. They think, they fail fast, move on, get another idea underway. And it's through this innovation that projects really start to gather some momentum and speed, and where real problem solving happens. And we've all seen the ultimate example, Apollo 13, which is where the clip is from there. They've got a crippled spacecraft, astronauts' lives at risk, and basically how that problem is solved is a box of parts that they've got available is dumped on the table. The only way the team can, that project team can succeed is by getting every voice heard. No idea is dismissed, no matter how silly or wild it is. Every idea is heard. And through doing that, they tested, they failed, and adapted until they finally solved that problem. And that's exactly the same as our projects that we solve. And that, to me, is what psychological safety enables: innovation when it matters most. And if innovation relies on that open and honesty, so does things like learning, because the other half of resilience is how teams actually learn to handle that failure as they go through. So apologies, another movie coming into this, but I think some of the movies actually show these examples best. Failure is inevitable in projects. The question is, what happens next? In low safety environments where we haven't got psychological safety at the forefront, failure tends to get hidden. People want to point fingers, assign blame, or quietly bury the mistakes so no one ever hears of them or sees them before it's too late. However, on contrast, in high safety environments, we actually get failure becomes more of a springboard. Mistakes are surfaced early, they're dissected, turned into lessons learned, and that's shared throughout an organization or a team, so we don't make that mistake next time. And I like to think of this as what happens in Top Gun Maverick, where the pilots are failing run after run in the training, but they don't hide it. They can't hide it anyway, but they don't hide it. Instead, they embrace it. They debrief after each run. They learn from it. They adapt. Each failure actually sharpens them until they're ready for that mission. And I think that's the same as what you can get out of project management as well, where you've got that high power of psychological safety in projects, just like in the cockpit. Failure is either something we punish or something we use to get stronger. And if we use it to get stronger, our projects will deliver stronger. I've lived both sides of that coin as well. Early in my career, I ran a pilot project that actually went really badly wrong, but we spent more time at the end of that project doing more of like a post-mortem, trying to looking at who was to blame, what was to blame, instead of actually trying to fix the issue, and then being open and honest about where it was caused. And that was more about people were just afraid of that blame that was going around. However, a few years later, different culture, we hit another problem. But this time, the first question the sort of project leadership asked was, so what have we learned from this? The difference in energy, it was really unbelievable. People owned the issue, they fixed it immediately, and we built something that was a lot better. This kind of showed me that psychological safety, again, isn't soft. It's actually more of it increases productivity within the team. And whether failure turns into blame or learning isn't down to the process. I think this actually comes from leadership. And you'll start to see a bit of trends going on here now. But with leadership, processes don't create psychological safety. It's actually the leaders that do. So we've all seen the bad version, a leader who talks at the team, not with them. We've seen that when you raise a risk and you're punished, you show a red report and you're interrogated, you speak out, and I hope it doesn't happen, but there is examples of it out there where people speak out and they're laughed at or not taken seriously. And in that type of climate, silence becomes the only safe option. It shuts people down. And if you shut people down, projects will shut down as well and fail quite quickly. But good leadership looks different. It's leaders who invite views from around the table. They encourage the debate, and they reward honesty, whether it's good or bad, even when it's in those really uncomfortable situations. It's leaders like in this example here of sort of Jon Snow and Daenerys from Game of Thrones, drawing people into the conversation from lots of different backgrounds, knowing that the best decisions come from open and honesty and not people who will just comply with them because they're the leaders. And for PMOs, this matters hugely. We sit in a powerful position to model that behavior ourselves in how we facilitate and how we respond to risks and red reports and how we work with the project teams and how we create those honest voices across the portfolio. So for me, the question is really like, what climate are you creating with your portfolio, with your PMO? Is it one of fear and silence, or is it one of open honesty and actively encouraging contribution? And that brings us to the signs, because when psychological safety is high or low, you'll see it in how teams behave. And as I've explained previously, those symptoms are really quite clear. So how do you actually start to bring psychological safety in? Psychological safety, to me, is an abstract. It's built in some very practical ways. Some of them seem very simple, I know. First, leaders and PMOs need to welcome challenge. If people know that they won't be shut down, they will actually surface risks earlier. Secondly, is to really encourage honesty. Thank the person who brings the bad news or good news. Actually thank them and actually reward them for being open with you. Admit mistakes. Owning our own errors actually signals it's safe for others to do the same. So I know there's this thing around wanting to show a level of confidence and strength, but also if we admit to our mistakes, it actually gets the team to open up as well. And finally, model curiosity. Ask questions before jumping to judgment. Show you're interested in the understanding what's gone wrong, not blaming. These behaviours do sound simple, but they're what separate a PMO that enforces compliance from one that really unlocks real delivery performance. And they're even more critical in hybrid teams, I think, especially in the world we're living in now, where we find hybrid is more the way that we're going. And in those environments, silence is easy. And in an AI-driven world where outputs can look flawless, but hide those sort of flawed assumptions, we need to really be curious to what is actually going on and asking those questions. So what does this mean practically as PMO leaders? How do we weave these principles into the way that we operate every day? Here's the heart of it. PMOs aren't just about frameworks and dashboards. I think we are the actual culture carriers. The way we facilitate, report, escalate, and build capability decides whether people feel safe to tell the truth or not. Some of the ways I've done it in the past is through facilitation and forums. So making sure that every PMO-led meeting is used as a bit of a signal. Do we only listen to the loudest voices, or do we make space for everyone? And there's different ways you can do that. You can rotate chairs, run anonymous polls within the meeting so that everyone feels safe and has a forum to actually come forward. Reporting and assurance, where honesty is tested. Reports can look green while the reality is slipping. A strong PMO calls it out and actually says, well, your report says green, but actually when we look at the plan, you're 2 weeks behind. Can you explain how this tallies up? And then basically relying that dashboards aren't proof, burn down charts, milestone plans, stakeholder feedback actually are. So the dashboards are a tool, but actually let's go into hearing and getting a bit more feedback from the wider team as well. And start to ask the team, do they believe that bad news is valued? If we don't, can we measure it? Or can we shift it in a way that can actually be measured? Escalation and governance. Escalation isn't failure, it's maturity. So track how early issues are actually escalated, celebrate projects that raise them before they actually explode, and analyze those escalation patterns from across the portfolio. If nothing is escalated until the actual crisis is here, that can actually be a sign of a red flag. So actually, why is everything taking so long to escalate? We want early escalation. So again, it's one of those measurable things you can start to look at within the organization. And around capability and culture, we want to build spaces where open and honesty lives. Community of practices have always been a good place for this, because it's where mistakes are usually shared quite openly in a protective environment. But think about simple feedback loops, short surveys after key meetings, asking, did you feel heard? Did you feel safe raising these concerns? Do it after some of your project meetings and see what the feedback is from the project teams. Don't have to do it after everyone, but just do it at sort of random intervals. These sort of micro surveys give real data on whether safety is growing or shrinking and where it is in the organization. And here's what's often missed, that it's not actually about being nice, it's about being accurate. When PMOs start tracking how early issues are raised and how often forecasts change after challenge, or how frequently projects move from green to amber before a crisis, we start to measure honesty and not just delivery in the projects. as automation increases, PMOs become translators between raw data and lived reality. It's going to be more on the PMO than ever to actually be able to be that balance between the growing reliance on technology and the human side. And that's the difference between PMOs that actually enforce compliance and PMOs that actually, in my opinion, accelerate delivery. So everything we've looked at today, that sort of watermelon problem, that delivery paradox, the hidden cost of silence, and then onto the leadership team setting the tone, and those sort of practical PMO tools that you can bring in, it all boils down to one core truth. PMOs don't just run reports or provide assurance. We can actually shape the culture of delivery within an organization. And psychological safety shouldn't just be a side project. It's the foundation for open and honesty, collaboration, and effective delivery performance within a team. When you go back to your teams, you can start to watch for those sort of micro moments that reveal your culture. Look for some of those symptoms, see where it is. Use some of those tools, surveys, to try and draw it out and see what's actually going on. And if the PMO is truly future ready, then our greatest untapped asset isn't another framework or tool. I think it's actually the people who feel safe enough to tell the truth going forward. Thank you, and looking forward to your questions.
Hi, James. Thank you. Thank you. We do not have a lot of time left, but we have two questions, and I don't know if you will be able to quickly answer those questions. The first one is from Mo. He said, how can the PMO navigate between reflecting the actual status of a project or a program and how the directors want to present? Also, how can we navigate through the political elements within the business to surface the reality? This is the first question.
It's a good question, and it's one that I've come across fairly recently, and it's about having that open and honest conversation with the directors from the start about what they want to present, but also sharing with why you're presenting things in a certain way, and it's finding a compromise between the two. In some cases, there may not be a compromise, and you may have to double up on the way that the reporting needs to be done, or that status. But actually, it's having that open and honest conversation. If you're looking at it more from the directors wanted to be presented as green and you're actually saying it's red, it's about having that conversation to say, well, this isn't the actual case. Here's the evidence to back it up. However, this is the mitigation we can to come around it. It is a really difficult conversation to have, but as it's practiced more and more, you'll often find that the directors and the leaders will actually embrace that change and actually want to have those more open and transparent conversations because they can see what the impact of failure is.
Okay. We have a second one, also from Mo. To clarify, how can we work with all of our stakeholders to ensure we are reporting the real current status of a project?
Again, a really good question. I think this is one of the hardest things, and it really depends on the project you're working with. From experience, how I try and get the maximum stakeholder engagement around what the real current status of projects are. We actively share the highlight reports with the full project team and stakeholder team, and encourage feedback on it to see if they actually agree with where we're showing. We try and back stuff up with evidence. So if we're saying that we're green on time, we will actually align that to the project plan and to other deliverables to show that we're still on track. And this is why we've said it's green. And we invite any sort of disagreement with that then. And if they can prove it or have got evidence to support it, we will change our reports.
So thank you so much. With that being said, we are going to thank James and thanks our audience, and thank you for more. Thank you for your question, and see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you.